no traffic. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I thank you all for being here today. I also would like to thank our online guests who are from all across Southern Africa. I have seen that one of my Botswana students have joined us today. I remember that I was so excited to see our guests that I forgot to introduce myself. So, Prof, I'm so sorry. My name is Guillaume Smit. I'm involved at the School of Theology and Ministry, and I'm responsible for the BTH degree program. But first of all, I'm only a lecturer. So this is my pedigree, and I am excited to introduce Prof. Schuurman to everybody. I've tried to memorize his very impressive bio. But the short of it is, he's a lecturer at Calvin University. He's an engineer from training. He specializes in artificial intelligence and religion. He's focusing on ethics in some way or another. And he wrote 2 books, Shaping of a Digital World, Faith, Culture and Computer Technology, as well as co-authoring a Christian field guide to technology for engineers and designers, published by Academic Press. The theme of his lecture today is Artificial Intelligence and the Biblical Story, Thoughts from a Christian Computer Scientist. So the abstract, may I read the abstract so that you can have an idea what to expect? Many believe that AI could lead us towards some sort of paradise. A rival story suggests that the future doesn't need us and that AI will ultimately threaten humanity. This talk will explore a vision for AI informed by the biblical story, leading to some recommendation for how it might guide us toward more responsible AI use in education. A biblical worldview remains relevant with implications for AI in today's digital age. And without further ado,
thank you. Thank you for that kind introduction. It's really a pleasure to be my first time in South Africa, and I've been delighting in the beautiful countryside and spent some time in Pretoria at Eros, and I'm very grateful for the invitation to be here. As mentioned, my talk will be about AI and the biblical story, some thoughts from a Christian computer scientist. Now, I'm sure you've all used ChatGPT. This is not something new. Your students certainly have, if you haven't. But I thought I would just start with something light, and I asked ChatGPT to write a 3-verse poem about Cape Town in the style of Dr. Seuss, and this is what it came up with. Down at the top of where 2 oceans do meet, lies Cape Town, so lively, so sunny, so sweet, with Table Mountain tall and flat on the top, and penguins that waddle and flip-flop and hop. The markets all bustle, the colors all gleam, the smell of the ocean drifts into your dream. From vineyards to beaches, from gardens to town, adventure is waiting each time you look round. O Cape Town, so bright and so grand, a treasure of beauty by sea and by land, with laughter and rhythm and skies painted blue, there's truly no place quite as wondrous as you. That's pretty amazing for a machine-generated poem. This is completely machine-generated. And you may ask, how does this actually happen? Well, if you Google, Cape Town, there's all kinds of information about Cape Town available on the web, and the large language model has certainly harvested all of that data as part of building its machine learning system. There's also lots and lots of websites and resources about Dr. Seuss, primary, secondary sources, and somehow this machine has mashed up all of these sources and created what I think is a fairly delightful little poem. It's quite remarkable. And how does it do this? Well, basically a large language model is constructed in 3 basic steps, very, very simply. You start off by collecting an enormous data set, okay? So AI and machine learning is always hungry for data. And because of the internet and the web and all kinds of data collection that we now perform, we actually have way more data than we've ever had. And then the second step is to take that data and to train a machine learning system to be unsurprised by that data. So given a sequence of words, be unsurprised by what comes next, by training it through these large data sets. And we're able to do that now because we have lots and lots of computing power. We have large supercomputers. These models sometimes take months of running and training on large supercomputing data centers. And then we create a model that's unsurprised by what the next word is in a sequence. And then there's a third step that's necessary. You can imagine that if you harvest data from the internet, that you're going to have some undesirable content and output. And so a third step is tweaking that data, tamping down some of the less desirable results. Technically, it's referred to as reinforcement learning, but basically you're tuning the neural network so that you minimize the undesirable outputs. And basically, you build a large language model. And the results have been quite remarkable. I mean, even computer scientists working in this field have been surprised at how well these models have worked. Some have been so impressed by their performance that they're making bold claims about what these machines will do. So here's an article titled, "AI Will Save the World," and it is by a fellow named Marc Andreessen. Marc Andreessen was a pioneer in the World Wide Web. He actually created the first graphical web browser. I don't know if any of you know what that was. This was back last century, in the 1990s. Before Netscape Navigator, there was Mosaic. I don't know if you remember. He was the author of Mosaic, one of the creators, co-creators. And he went on to become a venture capitalist in Silicon Valley and an influencer. And he writes an article called "AI Will Save the World," where he basically says every child will have their own personal tutor or coach. Every scientist will have an AI assistant. Productivity will accelerate like never before. The creative arts will flower. AI will help to cure all diseases. It'll achieve interstellar space travel. It'll reduce death rates. War will become unnecessary. And he goes on to say that AI will, quote, "make the world a warmer and nicer place," end quote. This is a huge, almost religious kind of vision of AI being able to bring in a kind of utopia. And people believe so much in this that they're investing countless billions of dollars, hundreds and hundreds of billions of dollars being invested in AI and AI research and supercomputing facilities. It makes me think of this quote from Neil Postman. Neil Postman was a cultural critic decades ago, 40 or 50 years ago. But he once wrote, "We believe nothing if not that history is moving us towards some preordained paradise, and that technology is the force behind that movement." It's a kind of trust in technology to sort of usher in a kind of utopia, a preordained paradise, one that involves technology and understanding of data, but does not include God. And like I said, it's a kind of religious vision. AI is a religious vision in Silicon Valley. Silicon Valley's obsession with AI looks a lot like religion. It's a fixation on AI to usher in a new heaven and a new earth of sorts, but without God. The Church of Techno-Optimism is an ideology, a belief in technology, and there's a name for it. It's sometimes referred to as technicism. Technicism is the trust in the progress of technology to solve all our problems and to bring health and material prosperity. And if you go back in time, you hear sort of bold claims like this that were made with the invention of electricity, with the telegraph, with the web and the internet, and most recently with AI. And in fact, you can go back even further. The Tower of Babel story is a story about people taking the new technology of the day, bricks and mortar, and trying to build their own bridge between heaven and earth, and to make a name for themselves. And so this sort of striving for human autonomy, for finding our own way to usher in a virtual paradise of sorts, is not a new impulse for humans. It's very early in the biblical story that we see this. It's a kind of modern-day Tower of Babel moment that we're in. And in fact, there's something called accelerationism. Accelerationists actually believe that to bring in this great AI, if it's capable of solving all our problems and curing diseases and making the world a warmer and nicer place, then it's something we urgently need to do as quickly as possible. So the ideology of accelerationism believes that unrestricted technological progress is necessary for universal problems to be solved. It carries utopian sort of views, advocates for faster AI progress so that human survival and human flourishing can be assured. So it's kind of an urgency. They're like evangelists for an ideology of technology. And that's the symbol for accelerationists. It's the hyperbolic curve. It's a religious impulse. And again, like I said, this goes back to the Tower of Babel, but we see it occur in other eras in history. And one of the key ones, I think, is the Enlightenment. The Enlightenment story is basically the notion that as people began to discover how the earth worked and uncovered scientific principles, as technology began to flourish, there became this view that through the pursuit of reason and the scientific method, humans will progress to create better societies and better people. It's a kind of rival to the biblical story in which humans redeem themselves and usher in their own version of heaven, but one that is without God. In this book by Carl Becker about the 18th century philosophers, he writes, "The philosophers in the 18th century demolished the heavenly city of St. Augustine only to build it with more up-to-date materials." And AI, of course, is the latest material. And in fact, some people believe in this so strongly that they see that AI will also be a solution to death. Maybe you've heard of Ray Kurzweil. He's a director of engineering at Google, former MIT professor, inventor, futurist. Actually, his latest book is called The Singularity is Nearer. His former book was The Singularity is Near. And the subtitle of his latest book is When We Merge with AI. And in one of his other books, he writes about how this will happen. He says, there won't be mortality by the end of the 21st century. Not if you take advantage of the 21st century's brain-porting technology. We will be software, not hardware. So he envisions a day when we'll be able to reverse engineer our neural networks, and that we'll be able to codify that, download our brains into a computer, and actually live in a virtual paradise of sorts. This is a kind of transhumanist theme, and he believes in this so strongly. This is his hope, and he writes about it very eloquently in some of his books. The idea that you can download your brain into a computer and live forever is actually based on a reductionistic notion of what it means to be human. It sort of presupposes that if you can capture the electrochemical impulses in your brain and you can codify them and simulate them with adequate fidelity, that you'll capture the essence of your personhood. And of course we know, right, from the biblical story, that to be human is, well, it involves the stuff of the earth. Adam was made with the dust of the earth, but also required the breath of the Lord to be animated. We see that also in the vision of Ezekiel and the dry bones, right? You have all the flesh coming together, but also requires the breath of the Lord. I think of Psalm 115, right, where it talks about those who trust in idols will actually become like them. And if you download your brain into a computer, you become a computer. And so, of course, this is a kind of idolatry, right? Whenever you replace the Creator with something in creation, you've constructed an idol. Now, this isn't the only story in town. So there is the accelerationists, there is the futurists who look forward to AI ushering a new heaven and a new earth. But there's also dystopian stories. There are those who are actually thinking that we're going to take a completely different trajectory with AI. And this is based on, I think an archetypal theme, the notion of the Frankenstein narrative, right, where we build technology and then it turns on us and destroys us. And you don't have to look far. Many science fiction movies are dystopian. They sort of carry this theme of technology turning on its human creators. I like this quote by Frederik Pohl. A good science fiction story should be able to predict not the automobile, but the traffic jam. So a good science fiction writer thinks about the kinds of problems that might happen if we make poor decisions with our technology. And for that reason, I think every computer scientist and engineer should read a little bit of science fiction. It's good for a bit of humility, epistemological humility. But it's not just the fiction writers and people in the humanities who have this sort of fear of technology, but there's also people working in Silicon Valley, people at the forefront of this tech themselves. A recent book by two fellows who are involved in Silicon Valley and know what's happening is titled, "If Anyone Builds It, Everyone Dies. Why Superhuman AI Would Kill Us All." And you don't have to look far to find other titles like 50 Ways AI Will End the World, The Artificial Apocalypse, Our Final Invention, and the End of the Human Era. Even the Pope is looking into how AI might pose a potential threat to humanity. This New York Times article points to some really leading voices in AI, including Gregory Hinton, who's the godfather of AI, one of the people who helped develop deep neural nets. And he is warning that there is maybe, he says, a 20 or perhaps more % chance that in the next 30 years, AI will pose an existential threat to humanity. So it isn't just people in tech that are seeing the world as being a kind of virtual paradise. Some of them are seeing that it will lead ultimately to our destruction. And it makes me think of the Walt Disney film Fantasia. I don't know if you recall this or whether you've seen it, but in this movie, Mickey Mouse plays a sorcerer's apprentice, and he has these chores to do of lugging water. And in the absence of the sorcerer, he casts a powerful spell to make his brooms do his job for him. And of course, they run out of control, and they fill the room with water. And I think this is kind of a parable for unleashing powerful technologies that we don't completely understand. The Sorcerer's Apprentice is actually based on a story by Goethe, like even farther back. But many people have compared magic and technology, right? C.S. Lewis in The Abolition of Man. Tolkien even sort of compares magic and technology as two different ways to manipulate the natural world and bend it to our wills. And the problem is that when we employ powerful magic or powerful technologies, they may seem to provide benefits in the short term, but can lead to disaster. And so this is a bit of a parable for that. Some go even further. Paul Kingsnorth is a Orthodox Christian, but also a journalist and writer from the UK. And he wrote an article a couple years ago titled AI Demonic, a Spiritual Exploration of AI. He actually just released a more recent book called Against the Machine. It came out about a week or two ago, and I'm just somewhere in the middle of it. But he paints a very depressing picture about where he thinks we're going with AI and with the technological society. Here's a little quote from that article. Whatever is happening, he writes, it seems obvious to me that something is being ushered in. Through our efforts and our absent-minded passions, something is crawling towards the throne. The great mind is being built. Something is coming. So this is a bit of a darker picture of AI. And so we see these two almost extremes, when we look around us, right? AI will save the world, and some are saying AI is demonic. And as Christians, how ought we to respond to some of these different stories, really is what they are, worldview stories. And I love this quote from Al Walters, who wrote a little book on Christian worldview called Creation Regained. And Walters writes, "The Bible is unique in its uncompromising rejection of all attempts to identify part of creation as either the villain or the savior." And so I think both of these approaches err by elevating technology too high, but on opposite sides. One sees technology as the savior, which of course nothing in creation is going to save us, and the other one elevates technology and AI as the villain, as the threat, and of course the real problem with the world is sin, not something in creation. And so the Christian story, I think, has something to offer in terms of looking at new technologies like AI, and also provides, I think, a little bit of a map, a roadmap for how to go forward. I love this quote by Alistair MacIntyre. Alistair MacIntyre is a philosopher of ethics. This is a quote from his well-known book, After Virtue. And Alistair MacIntyre writes, "We cannot answer the question, what ought I to do, unless we first answer the prior question of what story am I a part?" So I think this idea of, understanding the story that we're sort of nested in, the story that sort of forms us, is an essential one. It helps us to understand and answer basic worldview questions like, who are we? What are we doing here? What's wrong with the world? What's the remedy? These sort of big questions are answered more by the story that we're living in. And of course, as Christians, we're living in the biblical story. So how does the biblical story actually speak to something like AI, right? The biblical story written in the Bronze and the Iron Age, what does it have to say to a world of AI? It's hard to find proof texts about computers and AI. You won't find it in your Bible concordance or your Bible dictionary. Someone once said to me, well, Psalm 81 says something about how God left us to our own devices. So maybe that has something to say. But I think that's an example of poor, I'll leave it to the theologians, but poor biblical exposition and hermeneutics. So how do we actually use the biblical story to inform our work in AI? And I think the best way is to actually look at the biblical narrative as a whole. Like MacIntyre said, we don't know what we ought to do unless we know what story we're living within. And the biblical story, I think, can provide that guidance. The biblical story can be summarized using the basic themes and the sweep of the biblical narrative, right? Creation, fall, redemption, and new creation are themes that sort of map out the sweep of the biblical story. And I think that each of these biblical themes provides us with some basic worldview answers about who we are and what's wrong with the world and where are we going and what's the remedy. I see a Christian narrative, Christian worldview as kind of serving a function of a gearbox, right? When you think of an automobile, you don't connect the engine directly to the wheels. And I think in this analogy, the engine is like the scriptures, the power of scriptures. The wheels are like the area of application. And a gearbox goes between the engine and the wheels and directs the power of the engine, the power of scripture, to the area of application. And that gearbox is a Christian worldview. It's a Christian understanding. It's a Christian it's the Christian story that acts as a gearbox. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to march through some of these themes. I know my time is limited, and it'd be nice to have questions afterwards too, discussion. So what I'll do is I'll march through some of these biblical themes of creation, fall, redemption, and new creation, and we'll look at what the implications might be for the area of AI. So let's start with creation, the creation story. What might the creation story have to tell us about a theme like AI? Well, first of all, I would say I think we can say that AI is part of the latent potential in creation. So often when we think of creation, we limit it to trees and stars and fishies and these sort of natural things, right? That sort of that we see. But the truth is that creation includes all of the things that God has ordained to be, all of the possibilities in creation as well. Even in the Garden of Eden, as Adam and Eve were standing on whatever soil was there might have been sand in that soil. Sand is silicon dioxide. Silicon is the building blocks of modern computers. God is not surprised that we've discovered how to build computers. Artificial intelligence is based on patterns in creation. It's based on the ability to build algorithms and computational models. That's not something God is surprised that we're able to do. These are part of the possibilities that were there right from the beginning. And He gave us this sort of marching orders already in the first chapter of Genesis, the cultural mandate to sort of care for the earth and unfold all of its potentials. He calls us to fill the earth. And my understanding is that doesn't just mean with having lots of babies. It means filling the earth with all of its potential. We learn right away in the first chapter of Genesis and elsewhere that humans are made in the imago Dei, in the image of God. And that means that we're distinct from the rest of creation. We share things, of course, right? We're made out of the dust of the earth. But there's also something that's set apart for humans. We're made in God's image. It means we're also distinct from machines, regardless of what they can do. I think another important point, it's a little more nuanced point, but I think created reality is not reducible to data, right? When we read the creation story, God did not say, let there be data, and then build everything on top of that. He made each thing according to its kind, right? So creation is diverse and comprehensive. And dataism is a kind of ideology that we have to be on guard against. It's a reductionistic kind of ideology. Dataism is the ideology that sees everything as nothing but data. In one of his books, Harari sort of describes it as follows. He says, dataism is the ideology that people, humans, tomatoes, and giraffes are the same thing. They're just different ways of processing data. Right? It's a kind of reductionistic view about what it means to be human. When you have a hammer, everything looks like a nail. When you have, a computer, everything looks like data. And so this is a kind of reductionistic view that I think a comprehensive, diverse creation pushes back against. Now, of course, somewhere near the beginning, the human family fell into sin. And thorns and thistles now infect all of our work. And I can assure you as a computer scientist, they're there in computing as well. But we see that this fall into sin certainly affected our relationship with God. It's sort of, the human family was expelled from the garden and there was all kinds of consequences. But Romans 8 tells us that the entire creation is groaning. And if AI is part of creation, then AI is also groaning. It's also intertwined with the effects of sin. Sin is like a virus that attaches itself to God's good creation and infects it. And I think that's a good way to see the effects of sin. In fact, I can give you this provocative, somewhat example of that. I sometimes tell my students that, this idea of sin being like a virus can be understood this way. Internet pornography, for instance, is only possible because of God's good creation. And I'll tell you, stick with me for a moment, I'll tell you why. God created the possibility for human sexuality. God created the ability for bits to go down a wire and send information. God created the ability to visualize things on a two-dimensional screen with pixels. Those are all creational possibilities. But internet pornography is a perversion and a distortion of those good creational gifts in ways that God never intended us to use them. And so sin is like a virus. So we don't reject things out of hand because the creational goodness is still there, but we don't have this uncritical embrace of everything because we know that sin is like this virus. And so we need to distinguish between the good structures in creation that persist and the effects of sin that pervert and distort things, including our technology and everything else. And so I'll talk a bit more about this later on, but this discerning between structure and direction, I think, is essential. All right. In the fullness of time, God brought redemption through his son, Jesus Christ, and his death on the cross. I mean, the whole biblical story is sort of pointing to that. up to the coming of Christ. And I love these verses in Colossians 1. Colossians 1 it talks about the supremacy of Christ. Here's just a little snippet of that. For God was pleased to have all his fullness dwell in him, and through him to reconcile to himself all things, whether things on earth or things in heaven, by making peace through his blood shed on the cross. And my understanding is that word all things, which actually repeats itself many times in Colossians 1. My theology colleagues have told me that the original Greek for that is tapanta, which literally means everything. Like it literally means all things. So Christ's redemption is not just about personal salvation. I mean, we need to be right with us and God. Personal salvation is essential. We need to be reconciled with God. But Christ's redemption is a cosmic salvage operation of all things, right? It's intended to be as effective as far as the curse is found. We see this theme repeated also in 2 Corinthians 5, along with sort of our marching orders, right? 2 Corinthians 5 says, all this is from God who reconciled us to himself through Christ and gave us a ministry of reconciliation, that God was reconciling the world to himself in Christ, not counting people's sins against them, and he has committed to us the message of reconciliation. So if you look in those two passages, you see this comprehensive nature of redemption. Certainly it's about personal salvation, but it's the whole world. It's all things that is part of God's redemption plan. A former Calvin College professor, Gordon Spikeman, once said, nothing matters but the kingdom. But because of the kingdom, everything matters. It's this wide scope of redemption, right? Abraham Kuyper, a famous Dutch statesman and theologian, once had this famous saying we like to repeat at Calvin College, right? Jesus Christ is Lord of every square inch of creation. And that includes the technical parts of creation. And what is our calling? Our calling is a ministry of reconciliation. We've been committed a message of reconciliation. We are agents of reconciliation. We're participating in Christ's work of redemption by being agents of renewal in the world. And that includes things like technology and AI. Here's another quote from Al Walters. Humankind, which has botched its original mandate and the whole creation with it, is given another chance in Christ. We are reinstated as God's managers on earth. This is what we're called to do. We're called to be agents of reconciliation. So what does that look like in artificial intelligence? Yeah, that's a big question. We train computer scientists and engineers at Calvin University. And what we use, this is very shorthand, this is a quick summary, but we teach all of our engineers and computer scientists a set of design norms. These are used in some other Christian engineering schools in America as well. And these design norms come out of biblical principles, but also out of Christian philosophy, Christian worldview studies, which actually are based on the sort of comprehensive, multi-aspectual nature of created reality and thinking about how to be responsible in all of these areas. What are the norms in creation and how do we respond to those norms when we're building cultural artifacts? And here's just a list of some of these design norms. I mean, one of them is cultural appropriateness, right? Making sure that we relieve burdens while preserving what's good in a culture. So what's appropriate? Where are appropriate ways to use AI? What might that look like? Transparency has to do with telling the truth, with clarity, with being forthcoming, not bearing false witness, right? In terms of the claims you make about your products or how you use them or the documentation that comes along with them. Social norms have to do with thinking about technology and how it encourages community and hospitality and conviviality. How are we using our tools to enhance human community? Stewardship is a basic biblical norm. Does the design of our products actually consider the environmental impacts, sustainability, these sorts of questions? AI requires a lot of energy and a lot of water, as it turns out, for cooling. How do we actually build tools that take stewardship into account? Delightful harmony. This is based on the aesthetic aspect of creation. And when you're building a technical product, you're not doing art, you're doing practical engineering. But the aesthetic aspect should also be taken into account. This is an aspect in creation. And so this answers questions like, is the user interface pleasing to use? Is it delightful and beautiful? Nicholas Wolterstorff writes about a garden spade. A good garden spade is one that's good for digging, but it's also pleasing to use. This is something that the Apple Corporation has been very attentive to, right? The aesthetic aspect of technology. Delightful harmony between form and function. Justice is a fundamental biblical norm, right? It's a biblical call, So do the designs that we make, do the products that we make, does AI promote fairness? Is it biased? We'll talk a bit about that in a moment. Does it promote justice? Caring, right? A fundamental biblical theme of loving our neighbor. How do our products and services that we build actually show care and love for our neighbors? And then finally, the trust norm. The trust norm. The trust norm has to do with where we place our ultimate trust, of course, which we shouldn't put it in technology or AI. But it also has to do with reliability of products. There's a norm there as well, especially if your technology is, air traffic control systems or pacemakers or things on which human life and limb depend. We need to have things that are reliable. And it turns out that, the creation is tuned for these norms. These are the way that things ought to be. And I like this quote by H.H. Farmer. If you go against the grain of creation, you get splinters. I think God's creation is tuned to these things. And if you go against them, they're kind of like rubber bands. They sort of push back when you go against these things. And so these norms are things that we need to be attentive to. And these are a bit of a correction to the technical sort of temptation to develop a kind of tunnel vision where all you see is the technical bits and bytes, and you forget that when you create a technical artifact like AI or a large language model, that it has much wider cultural, social, political, environmental, justice implications. These are the things that a good Christian computer scientist should be attentive to. All right. Moving on. The Bible begins, right, in Genesis with a garden, but it ends with a city. Well, a kind of garden city. There's trees and there's a river flowing through it and so on, but there's also cultural elements there. There's cities and roads and gates and those sorts of things. The biblical story moves from this garden to a city, which involves some kind of cultural development. And it's a city, though, without sin, where Christ makes all things new. But the thing I think we have to remember as Christians, Christian engineers as well, is that God does not subcontract the New Jerusalem to us. The New Jerusalem comes down out of heaven. We don't build it here on earth. The builder and architect of the new heavens and the new earth is God. And we must never forget that. I think sometimes there are Christian engineers with a lot of zeal who think somehow that by their own efforts will usher in the kingdom a little bit faster. And I think we need to be careful about that. And so we need a bit of humility. But we still ought to be, unfolding, right? The cultural mandate, all the possibilities in creation. In the words of Lewis Smedes, we're called to make some imperfect models of the perfect world to come. That's sort of what our calling is. In order to be a witness to, what God's call is in our life, and to be obedient to Christ. But in this humility, knowing that God will ultimately bring the New Jerusalem down from heaven. But there's this curious verse. If you look in Revelations 21, there's these curious references. Revelations 21 talks about the New Jerusalem, and then it says, the glory and honor of the nations will be brought into it. Another verse talks about how the kings of the earth will bring their splendor into the New Jerusalem. So I think there might be some cultural artifacts that we'll recognize in the new heavens and the new earth. Purified from sin, to be sure, but they'll be there. Richard Mouw has this beautiful little book called When the Kings Come Marching In, where he sort of explores this idea. And he refers to Isaiah 60 as well, which is this vision of Zion, right? And it talks about Zion. There'll be flocks and herds and lumber and all kinds of things in Zion, including the ships of Tarshish. It says the ships of Tarshish will be there. The ships of Tarshish in the Bible are symbols of pagan commercial power. But somehow they're there in Zion, redeemed and put into service for the Lord. I think that's kind of neat. Maybe in the new heavens and the new earth, There'll be battleships and drones floating alongside, the ships of Tarshish, but redeployed, redirected in service to God, right? Micah has this wonderful vision of swords being bent into plowshares and spears being bent into pruning hooks, right? This idea of technology that's misdirected being redirected for cultivation, for caring for the earth, being repurposed for what God intended us to do. Not annihilated, but repurposed and reshaped. I sometimes ask my students, will there be computers in the new heaven and the new earth? And they say, no, I don't think, no. And then I ask them, I say, will there be harps in the new? Oh, yeah, there'll be harps for sure. Well, yeah, harps are human cultural artifacts as well, right? If computers are part of the original goodness in creation, possibilities, let's say, the original possibilities in creation, why wouldn't the new creation include some of those possibilities, right? The kings are bringing the splendor of the nations in, right? There might be rooibos tea in the new heavens, the new earth. There'll be beautiful things from all over the earth. But why not other creational possibilities, right? We need to be humble. We don't really know. We see through a glass darkly, of course. We don't know what's in store for us. But I wouldn't be surprised if computers are there. And they won't be running Windows, I'm pretty sure. Maybe Linux, I don't know. But I like to think that they'll be there, along with the ships of Tarshish. So that's a vision. All right. So very quickly, I think one of the things that biblical story, I think, sets a frame around our technical work, our cultural work that gives us an understanding of things. And I think one of the things that comes out of that is discerning between structure and direction, right? Knowing about the fall, knowing about creation and our call to redemption, and discerning between the order of creation, which is the good stuff that God has in the creation that persists, and the distortion due to sin, and distinguishing between the two. And here's an example. Genesis 2, verse 12 is this interesting verse that's just dropped into the creation story, right? It's actually in parentheses, Genesis 2, verse 12. And it just says this. It says, the gold of that land is good. Aromatic resin, which stands for pearls, I understand, and onyx are also there. So why is this verse just plopped in the middle of the creation story, that there's gold there and so on? I think God intended us to uncover and discover these things and unfold and shape them. Gold is part of the goodness in creation, but it can be directed towards obedience to God or disobedience to God. And if we look in the biblical story, we can see that gold is used to build a golden calf, to build Nebuchadnezzar's idols, to be used for all kinds of, idolatry, essentially. Right? So gold being directed towards idolatry in the biblical story. But we see other references in the Bible of how this gold is uncovered and directed towards God's kingdom. Exodus 31 is an interesting example. Exodus 31 is the story of Bezalel and Aholiab. And actually, Exodus 31, and you can correct me if I'm wrong here, is the first mention of the Holy Spirit in the Bible. Well, the first one might be in Genesis where the Spirit's hovering over the water, but the next reference, Exodus 31, the Spirit equips Bezalel and Aholiab to actually work with crafts and arts and with gold and to be able to teach that to other people. God is equipping through His Spirit the ability to use these things and build things. And if you fast forward, to the second last chapter of the Bible, we see gold reappearing. And now what is it? Well, this gold is one of the construction materials in the New Jerusalem, the streets of gold. Pearls are mentioned, right? There's gates of pearls. Onyx and other things are also mentioned in Revelations 21, describing the New Jerusalem. These sort of raw materials that were there right in the second chapter of the Bible reappear in the second last chapter of the Bible as the construction materials of God's new kingdom. And so I think, gold is an example of the possibilities in creation that we're called to uncover and discover. And AI is in the same category, I would say, computing and all of that. So let's look at structure and direction. What are some ways that AI might be directed towards good, towards shalom, right? AI can't bring shalom. We have to be careful with our language here, but AI might be able to bring shalom a little nearer, right? And here's some examples, right? Using AI to do weather prediction or earthquake predictions to save people from the effects of that. AI for precision medicine. AI to reduce traffic accidents, AI to increase crop yields, AI being employed for new drug discovery. One of the interesting things that AI is being used for is accelerating Bible translation. I've talked to people at SIL and Wycliffe, and they're telling me that AI has really turbocharged their ability to translate the scriptures. So here's a speculation. It may be that AI will bring about the end of the world, but not in the way that we think. Right? The Bible says that first the gospel must be preached to all nations, and then the end will come. So if AI helps us preach the gospel to all nations, it might accelerate Christ's return. Maybe, in a different kind of way than we might think. But it's doing some tremendous things for that. All right, so that's just some examples. These are things not only that we can do, these are things I would suggest we ought to do. And here are some examples of more inappropriate AI, all right? Chatbots promoting misinformation and disinformation and deep fakes. I don't know whether you saw, but OpenAI has a new app out that lets you make very realistic videos very easily. These deep fakes mean you can't really believe what you see or what you read anymore. AI systems hallucinate regularly. I mean, that's just part of their architecture. That if you're going to create an output that's based on statistical probability of next words, you're going to veer off into the weeds occasionally. That's called hallucination. But Eric Horvitz has actually said, he's Microsoft's chief scientific officer, he once wrote that our children and grandchildren could find themselves in a post-epistemic world where it's difficult or impossible to distinguish fact from fiction. And I think this is one of the things that we need to have. We have a kind of discernment, a kind of recognizing what appropriate uses of these tools are, and recognizing how they can be misused or abused. There's even a more disturbing application of this. There's something called latent persuasion. So social scientists have found that repeated use of large language models can actually change your opinions about things. And you can imagine, right, if a large language model is kind of, suggesting how you should end your text messages, or, write an email for you, or how you ought to write a document, and is giving you all these suggestions, it's like having a little Jiminy Cricket on your shoulder saying, well, maybe you should end your sentence this way. And actually they're finding that over time it actually shapes your beliefs and your opinions, which I think should be of concern to Christians especially. Now, this is not new, right? Media has always influenced us, right? Commercials and the stories in our wider culture. We're always tempted into a kind of syncretism with our faith. But I think this is something we ought to be aware of. Large language models are not neutral. They have a worldview that's baked into them based on the data sources that they come from. All right. AI also has justice implications, all right? So this is one of the fundamental norms that I listed earlier. The book on the far left here, Weapons of Math Destruction, the subtitle is How Big Data Increases Inequality and Threatens Democracy. Cathy O'Neill was an early pioneer in the world of data science. She worked in finance and saw how her algorithms were causing instability in currency markets, and actually partly to blame for the crash that happened in 2007. But she went on to see that, how AI machine learning is determining who gets a job and who gets a loan and who gets a promotion and who gets parole. In fact, in the US, one of the AI machine learning systems that was used to determine who gets parole was biased against African Americans. And Amazon had an AI recruiting tool that was biased against women. Well, you can imagine if your data set is full of men and your data is all based on male workers, that it will be biased against females in the future, even if you wanted to change that. And of course, AI models are also missing disease in black and female patients because the data sets are not justly constructed. So these are fundamental justice issues, I would say. And here's another issue. Maybe you want to push back on me on this one, but I think another inappropriate use of AI is using AI and chatbots as if they are people. And this is something that's very common now. So I'll give you some examples. So here, maybe Huguenot College will have some thoughts on this. Some people are suggesting that maybe we can automate the clergy. right? Just spin up a chat bot. So here it says, a chat bot would be available 24/7. It would be unfailingly attentive. It would remember the details of every interaction. It would pick up on subtle cues that humans might miss. It could be deployed almost anywhere. The cost of training a new clergy would be almost nil, right? You wouldn't have to send someone to seminary. That each generation would perform better than the generation prior. I mean, here you have an argument for why a automated chatbot reverend might be better than a real one. There are also lots of companies that are falling over each other to provide, chatbots for the educational sector, right? Little study buddies. Khan Academy has Khan Amigo, your never judgy study buddy, a little AI entity that works with you on your homework. Elsewhere, there are people building technology that actually lets you speak to your dead relatives, right? So what they do is they harvest, right, the text messages and the writing and even the voice prints of your dead relative, and they spin up a chatbot that basically mimics your dead relative so that you can continue to interact with this. And I think that's a problem. So I've shared this with a few people since I came. I lost my wife about 2 years ago to cancer, and I've learned firsthand about grief. And grief is not something you can go around or that you can go under or that you can, you have to go through it. And of course, as Christians, we have hope. We don't grieve like those without hope, but you also need to go through that process. And if you don't deal with grief properly, it comes out in other ways. It spills out in other ways. And I think this is a way to postpone grief that can actually damage people for having a settled kind of experience of coping with grief. Anyways, there are also AI girlfriends and AI companions that people are spinning up. And I ask my students, what do you think about an AI girlfriend? And some of them will say, well, there's some guys who can't get a girlfriend, and maybe this is a helpful thing. This is a loving thing for someone. And I would push back, and I'd say that a relationship with an AI girlfriend is a relationship of one person. And it actually damages you for real, authentic relationships, because real relationships that are healthy are not all about you. And they're messy, and they take work, and they take exchange, and having a relationship with an AI girlfriend may actually damage you for authentic relationships. Interesting movie, maybe some of you have seen, Lars and the Real Girl. It's an interesting sort of exploration of real, authentic human connection. The CEO of one of these companies that builds these AI companions says, it'll probably be okay if we end up marrying our chatbots one day. A little creepy. And of course, you don't have to look far. There's also an AI Jesus. Don't go looking for it. But I think the one thing we have to remember is that people are people, machines are machines, and neither are God, right? And I think this ontological distinction. And I think if we get accustomed to using machines as if they're persons, there's a kind of ontological confusion that can set in that we have to be careful about. And part of the theme of creation teaches us about how humanity is distinct, and our tools should reflect that. Now, I can think of one redeeming application of this, and it's this one. Some people have built an AI granny that basically answers the phones when scammers call, and it just ties them up with ridiculous questions so that they can't go on to phone real people. So this AI granny kind of bogs them down in a tar pit of circles, and that might be one redeeming application of chatbots. So I thought, what I'll do is I'll build my own chatbot, and I built a chatbot of Andrew Murray, because I know that that's a special name here, right? Andrew Murray, it's on your buildings and so on. I didn't know much about Andrew Murray, but I wrote very quickly a little chat bot that I spun up. The QR code is there if you want to talk to Andrew Murray. But I thought I would ask Andrew Murray, should an AI pretend to be a person? So this is now a chat bot that's trained on Andrew Murray's data, at least whatever is publicly available online and elsewhere. And it's pretending to be Andrew Murray, but this is what it says. As Andrew Murray, I, see it's using the first person pronoun, would approach this question with a heart-seeking truth and wisdom. It is essential to remember that authenticity and sincerity are virtues we must cherish. While technology can be a tool for good, it must be used with discernment and integrity. Pretending to be a person, even through artificial means, could lead to deception and misunderstanding, which are contrary to the teachings of Christ. We're called to walk in the light, to be honest and transparent in our dealings. Therefore, while AI can serve many beneficial purposes, it should not masquerade as a human being, says Andrew Murray's bot. For it lacks soul and spirit that God has uniquely bestowed upon us. Let us use technology to uplift and serve, always guided by love and truth. So this Andrew Murray bot is saying we shouldn't make Andrew Murray bots. And I think he's right. I think these sort of things, just interacting with them can actually, over time, create a kind of ontological confusion. Now, this doesn't mean that we can't use these sorts of things. I built a Heidelberg Catechism bot, which actually allows you just to ask questions about the Catechism. And it's not pretending to be a person. It's kind of like a research tool, right? You can grab the corpus of theologians and other writers, and you can use AI to kind of do research and explore. Always careful, of course, because AI can always hallucinate and there can be other worldview issues. But it could be used as a tool, but it doesn't need to be pretending to be a person. I think that this is a problem. And I think Andrew Murray might agree. Anyways, what I think is a useful way forward in education and other spheres is to think about a hybrid approach to AI. And a lot of people are talking about this co-intelligence approach, right? Not replacement of human beings, but amplification of human intelligence, right? Using AI as a resource to look through case law and law, right? To assist with medical diagnosis, right? Alongside a trained radiologist. As a writing assistant, not something that writes for you, but helps you to write better, to do scientific research, and so on. Here's a quote from a famous computer scientist. Frederick Brooks got the equivalent of the Nobel Prize in computer science. He was a Christian, passed away a couple of years ago. But in his ACM Award Turing speech, he said, he was talking about AI, the rhetoric of AI echoed the builders of the Tower of Babel. We will make machines that think. We will make giant brains. My thesis is that IA is greater than AI. That is, intelligence amplifying systems can, at any given level of available systems technology, beat AI systems. And I think this is how they ought to be used. This is a paradigm for thinking about it. And what might hybrid AI look like? Here's a few examples. One of my colleagues at Calvin University is an expert in large language models, and he's building systems that help people write better rather than writing for them. So he's building a little Microsoft Word plugin that will actually give you little cues along the side of your document saying, oh, maybe you should expand on this, or oh, maybe an example here would be helpful, or this is not clear, or you've said this already, right? You know, like things that an editor might give to help you write better prose. Provide feedback to help them write better, not write for them. Wikipedia is now using AI, but not to replace its volunteers, to help them with the drudgery of some of the automated stuff that needs to be done. And then here's an example of AI in radiology. Apparently, combining AI and radiologists, humans, actually works better than either on their own. And I think that's an example of Frederick Brooks's prediction. So these are examples of hybrid AI. And what might that look like in seminary education or other areas? I don't know, but that's a way forward to think. And I also think as Christians, we ought to have this dialogue beyond ourselves, right? You know, the church needs to have something to say about this. Christian educational institutions need to be thinking about this. But I think we also have to think about the wider common good, right? This notion of principled pluralism. Principled pluralism is encouraging respect and dialogue in the wider public sphere among those of differing beliefs to forge partnerships in service of the common good. And that's not easy work, but I think as Christians we're also called to be there in the public square, right? This is a Jeremiah 29 kind of call, right? That the Israelites, when they were in Babylon, were told, right, you know, build houses and plant gardens and have children and pray for the city because if it flourishes, so will you. Right? We're called to pray for the city and to help with the common good as well. Right? It's part of loving our neighbor as well. And so these are some organizations that most of them here are secular, but they're interested in AI for the common good. partnership on AI to benefit people, and data ethics for all, and ethical AI and machine learning. The top organization, AI and Faith, is actually an interfaith organization. So I'm an advisor for AI and Faith, and they bring in folks who are Christians, Jews, Muslims, Baha'i, Hindus, for a conversation about how we might be able to work together for the common good in the public square. Here's a quote from the president of Microsoft. He writes in one of his books, "Ultimately, a global conversation about ethical principles for AI will require an even bigger tent. There will need to be seats at the table not only for technologists and governments and NGOs and educators, but for philosophers and representatives of the world's many religions." So we're actually being invited into the conversation, and I think we ought to join that and have a voice, thinking about the common good. All right, this is my last slide, and I'll wrap things up. I wrote an article a little while ago with the title, "The Problem with AI is Deeper Than You Think." And I didn't mean to say that we need more computing power, or we need more energy, or we need more data, or anything like that. The problem, I think, stems already from the human heart. I think a lot of the problems we're seeing are a problem of the heart. Right? Proverbs 4, verse 23 says, "Above all else," it's of strategic importance, "above all else, guard your heart, for everything that you do flows from your heart," including our technical work, including our work with technology, our cultural work. Sometimes it's easy to believe that what we do is based on what we think, but I think we're more animated by what we love. Like, this goes back to St. Augustine, right? It's my love that carries me. I think we're still creatures that love, and we're directed by love. So we need to guard our heart. How do you calibrate the heart's compass towards a vision of God's biblical story of the kingdom? My colleague at Calvin University, James K.A. Smith, I don't know if you've heard of him. He wrote a book called "You Are What You Love." He's got the Cultural Trilogy series. He's been writing about this. And I think he's spot on, right? We need to calibrate our hearts. And how do we do that? I think it's partly by recovering ancient disciplines, right? Of regular Sabbath and worship, personal devotions and service. I mean, these are ancient things, but their purpose is to recalibrate our hearts back towards the biblical story. I think otherwise we're always going to be threatened with a kind of syncretism that will shape what we do. And so it comes from the heart. Frederick Brooks, this famous computer scientist, once wrote, "If we would have our creations be true, beautiful, and good, we have to attend to our hearts," right? And I think that's true. So I think I'll park it here, and then I don't know if there's time, but if you'd like to have a discussion or talk some more, I'm more than willing to do that. So thank you very much. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Any questions for David? I think from my side, as a social scientist, thank you for easing my heart. It is like an unknown, and if it's unknown, there's sometimes fear. And how do we manage the fear? But you gave me something. I am still human, and I just need to return to my own humanity and be truthful to my own story. And that's also the biblical pathway that I use as my direction. In this changing world, we had a discussion yesterday morning in our opening ceremony. We had an opening ceremony about the age of disruption. We experience something of disruption on every single level, and technology is one of those disruptors. And how do we stand tall in this age of disruption to ensure that we don't feel lost or lose our own identity in Christ? So thank you for for giving me the comfort of believing that yes, it's still part, it's not just all bad. Because I think in my own understanding is, we're dealing with something, we don't know what we're dealing with, and if we don't know what we're dealing with, either we embrace it or we turn our backs to it. But there is also a middle way in this, and introduce it as part of I am human, and this is part of the world I am living in, but I still be human.
Yeah, and I think we need the social scientists. As we sort of uncovered some of these things, I think we're going to discover, more and more, when we try to build chatbots that pretend that they're human and so on, that there's going to be more and more consequences over time. And I think the social scientists might be the ones that are going to be, among the first that are going to help us sort of uncover some of these things. Let me just quickly show you a slide that sort of summarizes some social science research in this area. So this is a paper that was done about how AI and human behavior shape psychosocial effects. So I'm not a social scientist, but I found this interesting, right? They said overall higher daily usage across all modalities and conversation types correlated with higher loneliness, dependence, and problematic use, lower socialization. They have a bunch of these charts that the more that you use chatbots, the more lonely you get. Your socialization with people actually goes down. Your emotional dependence on AI chatbots goes up, and problematic use goes up. So I think the social scientists can discover these creational norms, and we begin using these tools in inappropriate ways. Right? The rubber bands will push back. We'll see that actually the promise of an AI companion actually leads to the opposite, more loneliness. And so, yeah, that's the thing with an idol. It promises everything and in the end demands everything and delivers nothing. And we need to be attentive to that. Yeah.
I think the balance for us would be to find a middle way. A few years ago, and I said it yesterday as well, we were bombarded by the idea of a fourth industrial revolution. And the acceleration of technology, it is impossible to understand the magnitude of it and how it's changing our realities. But in this, that pushing back is so important because there's also a revolution in this, and that might be something of back to humankind and find the balance of this is the world we're living in, but we're still human and we still have the true relation with God. And the biblical way is the way to follow in keeping our humanity in this changing world.
It may be that trying to build machines that act like persons, that we will return to the question of what does it mean to be human? More like this technology may actually be pushing us to those questions more than ever before.
Also to inform curricula and as a soft skill and a competency for students to understand this reality. We're not addressing it in our curriculum. To teach students how to embrace this in a virtuous way. Yeah. We know this is the rules for the use of artificial intelligence. Yeah. You may or you may not. This is rules, this is the policy, this is the legislation, this is how we're going to nail you if you fall into using it. Yeah. But how do we teach our students to embrace this as a virtue, as part of still staying human? And that is competencies in the curriculum to identify it, to know I am human, back to humankind in every single curriculum. I think we sometimes believe in social work training, in education training, in theology even. It is second nature for us to be human because we relate. But in this, it is like it is like the unknown, and if you don't know how to embrace this and get ways in dealing with the reality, it will overwhelm you. Well, that's my prediction. We see the same, with students that's really isolated in the sense of social engagement. They on their phones the whole time.
The anxious generation.
Yes, and mental health of our students declining extremely.
I have to say, this is a big great reminder, and thank you very much for your presentation. I really enjoyed it. There's a lot of profound thinking that went into everything, and that's what's important for me. The whole idea of university and studying in an objective world where you don't have a priori sort of worldview, you just enter in this field of knowledge and data and enjoy what is there and explore. That is exposed by what is happening in this world of AI as an unrealistic way of living life for human beings. Just exploring the world of knowledge, etc., etc. Because AI can do that better than any human being. Explore the data and knowledge and bring it together and align data with other data and making new assessments or whatever, or creating theories. AI can create theories better than anyone. So it brings us back to the basic notion of what study is from a human perspective. What a university is. So
what it should be.
And what it should be. So you're coming from Calvin College, Calvin University. You have a particular worldview in which you brought in, and from that point of view you are exercising whatever you're doing in academics. So for us as college, I listened thoroughly to what you said. Everything goes back to what our worldview and our understanding of humanity is. So for us as you go to college, this is very important. This is very important because we can make a contribution. Whereas I'm not sure that if you're in the open sea of knowledge, the contribution, the human contribution, is going to last.
You can offer
without a particular point of departure.
Absolutely. There's something you can offer that you can't get at the University of Cape Town, right? A kind of understanding, a beginning, a kind of anthropology that's kind of embedded, like what does it mean to be human, that informs a pedagogy, that informs a worldview. I went to one of the big state universities in Canada, provincial universities, which is a big technology school in Canada, and I thought technology was neutral. I was a 19-year-old and I was going to, change the world. And it wasn't until later on that I realized no one ever stood up in the university and said, this is our worldview, at this technical unit. But embedded in every presupposition, every class had a view of what the world was. It was a machine that could be manipulated and made more efficient. There was an idea of what it meant to be human. There was a view of the good life, a kind of careerism, a kind of, that there was embedded, there were idols kind of all around me that I didn't see. I think it's essential. Here's another slide that I got a whole bunch of these, but faith is always present, right, in every subject area. So at Calvin we say faith informs physics, mathematics, computer science, right? Not just the religion class. It's every square inch. Faith is not merely a hidden assumption buried in the background which seldom rises to the surface. Faith works to shape and mold the entire scientific enterprise. Such radical position taking is always there and always real. Therefore, any science worth its salt must be willing to explicate its implicit assumptions. For science, like all human activities, is an exercise of the heart out of which are all the issues of life. Science is one way in which men express their religious identity. It's one way we put our faith to work. This is a quote from, on the right here, from one of the top computer science magazine, the Communications of the ACM, the Association of Computing Machinery. And I just saw this pop out in one article that was about a year or so ago. And it said, researchers and practitioners ought to be intentional and explicit about worldviews and value assumptions. The systems they design will always encode some view about the world. What is true, beautiful, and good? You know, what is it that we're after? It's always there. And I think the neat thing about a Christian college is that we can be explicit. We can put these on the table. And it can inform everything that we do. So, yeah.
But AI is exposing that myth of a neutral sort of anthropology and a neutral understanding of it's really exposing. And I have to say, your colleague Jamie Smith is really helping us all with understanding human desire. And I thought the work that he has done is profound for the cause of theology and being church.
Especially rituals and formation and liturgies, right? Everyday liturgy. Like there is a liturgy of the sports stadium. There is a liturgy in a rugby match that's shaping you in a certain way. There are anthems. And there are cathedrals, and there are anthems, and there are practices, and there's creational good stuff there too. I watched one of my first rugby matches about a week ago. You can celebrate in the creational possibility of play and sport, but every good thing in creation can be turned into an idol, right? When you elevate something, and it has its own way of capturing our hearts. And I think as Christians, probably the bigger problem is syncretism, where we have the biblical story and then we have some other story that we kind of, that smuggles its way into our thinking, right? That whether that's technology, God and technology, or God and whatever it is, right? So yeah. No, absolutely. Even the birds want to get in, apparently. It's kind of, yeah. Yeah.
Any other questions? As we refer, I think you wrote something on agency in AI. I'm thinking a lot about that nowadays and how should we not rethink this idea of agency just to say, no, because it doesn't tick this boxes, it's not an agent. Could you say something about that? Because I think this post-humanist idea is not to become like humans, but it's to be, I think, more than that, or actually different. So the idea that we need to compare us all the time, what can AI do and what can we do, I think it's kind of almost a lost idea. It doesn't take us really that far. So I want you to say something about that, and maybe something about, I also thought about this question of who are we as human beings, because we're really confronted with it in different ways, and then the idea of speed of AI. So we don't have a lot of time to think what is going on, and how to process it, and how to even react, and so I think you can say a few things about that.
Yeah. Good. AI and agency. I have an article that I called AI and Virtue and Artificial Intelligence as well. Yeah.
Taking the idea of agency, it does much more than what anything is done in the past. So I don't totally agree. I've read the article, but I don't know if there's more. But I mean,
yeah.
What would you say? Should we think a bit different about agency than just those technical? Because it doesn't quantum this, therefore it's not an agent.
Yeah, so I wrote an article called Virtue and Artificial Intelligence, where I make the argument. So I ask the question, can an AI be virtuous? And I conclude, for those who haven't read it, that no, because virtue requires agency. You need to be able to make a choice, and you need to know that you're making that choice. And under the hood, I think one of the things that might be helpful for an education is to kind of expose at least a kind of basic understanding of what a chatbot is. And under the hood, it's just doing all kinds of multiply accumulates on a large network of weighted nets. And in fact, every chatbot could be created with gears and pulleys and camshafts, could be made mechanically. So every electronic computer could be made mechanically. There are mechanical equivalents for all of the functions inside a computer. And then that can give you a concrete view of really what under the hood, there's just a bunch of math that's going on. There is no there. And even, given a set of inputs, an AI system will always have a deterministic output. It has no choice. If these are the inputs, you do all the calculations, you will get an output. Now, on a chatbot, you'll get different replies sometimes. With a query, it'll give you different results because they've added a stochastic element. They've added a random element where they'll say, what are the next probable words? Well, here's the top 10 possible next words. And then they use a bit of randomness in order to pick one of those words, and it sends it off in a particular direction. But even random number generators in a computer are deterministic. There is no true random numbers in a computer. It's called pseudo-random. There's an algorithm for computing a random number that appears random to humans, but really a computer just can't pick a number that it's thinking about out of the air. It's always based on something. So it's actually not... So even the randomness is deterministic. And so my argument was that they really don't have agency. But what I do argue, which I think is kind of an interesting concept, I talk about the notion of virtue by proxy. So this idea that the machine can't be virtuous, but it can have virtue by proxy, where a human programmer can code into it virtuous responses to inputs he might anticipate in the future. So if you were creating an autonomous vehicle, that you would create a polite driver. You would program that car to be polite to pedestrians, to always signal before it changed lanes. Or in other applications that you would take the virtue of the programmer and then code it, because you're right, an AI machine, once it's coded, will continue to make decisions, so to speak, that are separated in time and distance from the programmer. There's something automated happening now, and so I think the question is how can programmers program some virtue by proxy? But there's some virtues that really, I think when people talk about some of these automated virtues, it's a very thin, operationalized view of virtue. In the Christian tradition, and I'm not a social scientist or virtue ethicist or anything like that, but in the Christian tradition, there's a very deep idea of what virtue is that's based on... Well, for instance, Shannon Valor is a philosopher of technology. He wrote a book 3 years ago called Technology and the Virtues. She says, we need a virtue ethic. And so she lists all of these things, these virtues that she's gleaned from the world religions, but they're cut off at the knees from their foundational kind of, the things that they came out of. So, she talks about, for instance, the virtue of humility. Should be thinking about yourself less. But really, in the Christian tradition, the virtue of humility is much, much deeper than that. It's a deep-seated faith that God has got us, and that we don't need to kind of assert ourselves in that kind of way, right? And then the work of the Holy Spirit. N.T. Wright, in his book, After We Believe, is about virtue in that sense too, right? It's something that we cultivate. It's something that's deeper than just... responses to inputs. And so that's part of what it means to be human, a human anthropology that's based in virtue and humans being uniquely able to kind of have agency for virtue, but then responsibility for our tools. In terms of...
And our responsibility as a higher education institution to unlock specific characteristics in our pedagogy when we start working with our very young students. And we've isolated virtues, if I can call it virtues, like integrity, morality, ethics. How do you intertwine this in curricula? How do you unlock this as part of critical thinking for a student to also form a world view on what is virtuous, what is according to biblical understanding, right or wrong?
And one of the interesting things about virtue that I've learned is that many virtues can only be practiced in community. Like how do you learn patience? You can't learn that by yourself. Like N.T. Wright makes this point as well, right? Like the Greeks had this idea of the virtuous philosopher that was this sort of sole person that would be able to develop into the philosopher king or whatever it was, right? That they would be able to develop. But the idea of a lot of Christian virtues like humility, like patience, like love, and so on, you really need to be in community to practice that. You can't learn to be patient on your own, or to love other people on your own. And so I think that's one reason why we need to be part of a church community, because we find annoying people there that we have to love and live in community with, right? And maybe we're the annoying person and others can learn, right? I mean, there is something, I mean, it takes practice, of course, too, right? So yeah.
Colleagues, we've run out of time. Thank you very much for a really, really interesting lecture. I've learned a lot and a lot to think about, especially in our planning and how we will adjust in the future, also our curricula. Colleagues, you're most welcome to have some tea or coffee. Afterwards, we're going to take our guests now for a campus tour, if it is okay. So we'll love and leave you. Anita, please, you and Andre and all our guests, please help yourselves. Jaco, am I right? Is this the next step?
Yes. Before the next step, preliminary next step, I was asked to thank you. I was normally preaching, so I was tasked to thank you and Prof for visiting us. It might also be a good way into saying that you might not know this, but Calvin, your institution and the Ignorant College has a deeper connection. I'm currently lecturing a 12-week course on the practices that create virtue and discipleship, which was deeply influenced by your colleague, Professor Smith's work. So please also send him our regards from the unknown institution here in the southern part of Africa. I was also then asked to hand you some gifts. This is from us. Prof, you also have one. Thank you for visiting us. We hope that you enjoyed the hospitality of Africa. And we hope to see you again in future for a longer stay. Thank you.
From our side, I'd just like to say thank you for this opportunity. We were at a conference in April in the Netherlands, and there we met Prof. Derek Schuurman, and we immediately decided to invite him because of his insights into everything that he said today. So from our side also, our greetings. We are honored to be associated with you. At AROS, our chair of council always says we have medestanders. And we see Ignorant College as a medestander. And thank you that we can do that. And I would also like to congratulate you on the appointment of your fairly new rector now, Professor Bloemreta. We go back a long, long, long way. Oh, you can. Oh, I was a mathematics teacher in high school. Yes. So, and through the years, we became colleagues at Northwestern University. We became friends. So thank you for that. And also, may God bless you also on this huge task that you have at Ignorant College. And thank you from our side and for this opportunity also. Thank you.
Thank you, colleagues, for joining.